the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. For anyone who grew up in the 1990s, this might have been their preferred console of choice. Released in August of 1991, it brought graphics and sound that were superior to its #1 rival, the Sega Genesis. Following the success of the NES, the Super NES was another hit for Nintendo. Then came the Sony PlayStation. With its CD-based games and amazing graphical capabilities, Nintendo had to move on. On September 29, 1996, Nintendo released the Nintendo 64 to North America. Despite the rise of CD-based consoles, Nintendo stuck with cartridges for their new console. Then, 1 year later, in October of 1997, Nintendo released the Super Nintendo 2, a smaller, lighter version of the Super Nintendo. But why? Find out on The Gaming Historian. If you've seen my earlier episodes, you know that I've already covered the NES-2. Now, the NES-2 had many noticeable improvements over the original model and was probably worth buying. But what about the SNES-2? Well, let's take a look. Side by side, you can see the SNES-2 was much smaller than the original model. It's also much lighter as well. The power button and reset switch were condensed to the left side of the system, and the games load on top, just like the older model. However, there are some noticeable differences. The SNES-2 lacks an RF connection on the system. There's also no eject button, and once again, just like the NES-2, there's no LED light. It also feels kinda cheap. So why even buy the Super Nintendo? I'll admit it's much more sleek and much more compact than the original, but there's little incentive to upgrade from the original model. But Nintendo didn't make the SNES-2 for those already owning a Super Nintendo. It was for newcomers to video games, and it was a great budget system. By examining the specifications of the SNES-2, it's easy to determine that the SNES-2 was much cheaper to produce than the first model. By taking out features that seemed unnecessary and redesigning the system, Nintendo saved a lot of money by scrapping the old model and continuing with the redesigned model. Many gamers thought the Super Nintendo was being redesigned to incorporate the CD-based attachment Nintendo was rumored to be releasing, but the Super Nintendo 2 had no expansion slot like the original version. With the approaching 1997 holiday season, Nintendo surveyed that many people were still avid 16-bit gamers. They also noticed that many consumers were hesitant to commit to the larger price tags of consoles. Thus, to appeal to those who never had a Super Nintendo, or those who wanted to get into gaming, they released the SNES-2 in October of 1997. It retailed for $99. Compare that to the Nintendo 64, which was $200, and the PlayStation, which was $150. It also came bundled with Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island. It's a perfect successor to the last Super Nintendo bundle, which came with Super Mario World. They also released a similar looking model in Japan, named the Super Famicom Jr. Surprisingly, 1 month later, Nintendo released their last first-party game for the Super Nintendo, Kirby's Dream Land 3, on November 27, 1997. So while not technically a better Super Nintendo, the SNES-2 is still a nice substitute from the original. It fits nicely onto shelves, is very lightweight, and it still does what the Super Nintendo is supposed to do: play games. Production of the Super Nintendo ended in the year 1999. By then the next generation of consoles was already in full swing. But the Super Nintendo did enjoy a long lifespan, and it gave us a lot of great games. If you can find an SNES-2, it's a nice piece to add to your collection. I picked mine up at a yard sale for about $10. If you want to pay full price, they go for about $50 to $60. Now to wrap this video up, I wanted to mention that since the SNES 2, Nintendo has not released a redesigned home console in North America. The Nintendo 64 did have some color variations, as did the GameCube, but that's about it. Will there be a new Wii model for us in the future? We'll see. Take care guys, I'll see you next time.